Audio Jungle.
All right, everybody, welcome to another exciting episode of Baseball Now. I'm your host, Scotty. I hope everybody is having a great, happy 1st of July. Now, as we turn it over into the dog days of summer and the baseball season continues to wind on, we've had a couple of upsets this week, a couple of blowouts, and we're going to turn to Thomas in our Atlanta studio here in just a minute for his weekly rerun. And we're going to have another look at our who's hot, who's not, and any trade specials. So as your host, Scott, I hope everybody just sits back and enjoy the show. Thomas, what do we have today on your weekly rerun?
All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a look at the Week 14 recap. We had a lot of close ball games this week. We had an upset this week as well. So let's go ahead and take a dive into it. Our first game, you have the Warner Robin Bombers, that's Jackson, at 486 points. Over the Georgia Dominators, that's myself, at 462 points. This is your upset for the week. This game was close all week. The Dominators had an opportunity on Saturday to close the gap with 4 starters going, and the starters just simply did not perform to their standard. And so the Dominators was playing catch-up all day Saturday and all day Sunday and just ran out of time, as they say. Let's look at the top performers for both the teams. We'll start off first with Jackson. Sanchez with 56 points this week. Bibby with 54. And Pasquianto at 46 points. Now, Bibby and Sanchez was on the top performers last week as well. So those two could be some interesting names to keep in mind for the trade deadline coming up in a month or so. And now for Dominators, you had Nola at 54, you had Steele at 48, and you had Brown at 34. Steele and Brown are starting to get on a roll here. So that's going to be interesting to see how that goes. The Bombers, they moved to 4-10. The Dominators moved down to 8-6 now. Let's take a look at the next game. The game of the week, the Demon Ducks Greg at 441. The Atlanta Express Ruben at 414 this week. Greg moves to 10-4, and the Express moves to 9-5. Express is on a 3-game losing streak, which we'll talk about that here a little bit later on in the program. The top performers, will start off with the Demon Ducks. Lindsay, Lugo at 72, Cratchit at 59, and Stone at 51 points. For the Express, Aaron Judge 59, Cease at 43, and Harper at 34 points. Another tightly, contested battle between the two programs. And now we'll move on to the Macon Chili Dogs. That's Ken 374. The Gatlinburg Cubs. That's Scotty at 426. Scotty moves to 3-11. Ken drops down to 7-7. That could be a big loss for Ken right there, looking for that playoff spot. That could be a big downer. The top performers for Scotty, Machado at 38, Morton at 35, and Ward at 34 points. Ward's a common theme too. Let's look for the Chili Dogs. Ramirez at 53, Nimmo at 40, and Otani at 38 points. Another common theme with Otani and Ramirez, same as last week. Interesting game on this one. The Gatlinburg Cubs, could they be getting on a roll? Who knows? They got the Express coming this week. The Express is down a few points. So this should be an interesting ball game. And the finale, the Wildcats, 583. Just a little crazy at 582. Tammy versus Dan. A big game that was really a playoff kind of eliminator. The Wildcats, they tied the series with Dan at 1-1. So the tiebreaker goes to the Wildcats based off of points for. in the playoff, and we'll get that up. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And a really close ball game right here, folks. It comes down to exactly 1 point. So let's take a look at the performers. For the Wildcats, Guerrero at 74, Peralta at 55, Perez at 48. For Dan, just a little crazy, Bradley at 63, Devers at 49, and Bassett also coming in at 49 points. So a lot of interesting ball games this week that was going on, tight battles. There was no blowout. Everybody was within about 55 or so points. Dominators are now right back in the playoff bubble, so to speak. Greg is at 10-4. There's a conception, I think, just like there was a conception with the Wildcats when they started off on a roll, the Express when they started off on a roll. I think there's now an idea that the Demon Ducks could be getting ready to run off and leave the league. And speaking as as a manager of the Dominators, I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's too many good teams. I think there are ebbs and flows. There's too many teams that'll come up and that's coming down. So if the Demon Ducks think that they're just going to run off and leave everybody, I think that's a bogus and a fatal error that they're thinking. So other than that, though, I'm interested to see how it's going to shape up for this week. But that has been your Week 14 recap.
Thank you, Thomas. We are here in our East Tennessee Cash and Sports Scientific Lab, where we discuss and break down all trades and major waiver pickups. Now, we have had a quiet week for the most part on trade deals and on waiver pickups, but we did have a trade that came through this morning that we're here to bring you about between Just a Little Crazy, that's Dan, and the Georgia Dominators, that's Thomas. So let's go ahead and break down and look at what we have in this trade. Just a Little Crazy, Dan is sending Kendall Marte and Ryan Heasley, a second baseman from Arizona, and a relief pitcher from St. Louis, which, if a lot of fans remember, Ryan Heasley is the one who caused the big uproar at SunTrust Park back 4 or 5 years ago with the playoffs for St. Louis. So you got a little bit of that history there. And Georgia Dominators is sending the Just a Little Crazy, Bailey Ober, starting pitcher from Minnesota, Garrett Cole, which is the big name out of this whole deal is centered around Garrett Cole, and Norman Gorman, a second baseman from St. Louis. So you got a couple of pitchers and second basemen flipping teams. I do think Garrett Cole is going to be a good fit for Just a Little Crazy, and I do think that Heasley is going to be good for Thomas. So that's your trade news. Thomas, let's send it back to you for that Week 15 recap, or look ahead.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a look at this week's Week 15. What's on the slate for this week? The first game, you've got the Gatlinburg Cubs at 3-11. That's Scotty taking on the Atlanta Express. That's Ruben. Ruben's lost a couple in a row, so this is a big bounce-back opportunity for Ruben. And the Gatlinburg Cubs, they may not be a playoff team this year, but they can make some noise and have a respectable finish to their season. You have the Wildcats, Tammy, at 8-6 against the Warner Robin Bombers of Jackson's 4-10. Fresh off of 2 upsets in a row over the Demon Ducks and over the Dominators. So we're going to see how that plays out this week as he takes on another playoff team. Could he make that a triple 3 in a row? And the Wildcats, this is a game that last week the Dominators really needed to win to start, inching ahead in that playoff spot. And they didn't do so. And now the Wildcats have the exact same opportunity that the Dominators had last week. So we'll see how that goes. And you have the Macon Chili Dogs against Just a Little Crazy. Ken versus Dan. Dan scuffling a little bit. Ken also scuffled last week. So this is another game right here that 2 teams that are on that playoff bubble, per se. And you have the Demon Duck Lindsays And that's Greg against the Georgia Dominators. This is your game of the week. You've got two playoff teams right now, the 1 seed versus a 4 seed. That'll be talked about a little bit later on. So very interesting to see how this week is going to evolve. Greg leads the series 2-0, but both of those games, the margins was 40 points or less in both of those games. So there's no blowouts. As accustomed to the Demon Ducks this year, they don't blow anybody out. Not saying nothing bad about them, because all you need to do is get a win. It don't matter if you win by a point or by 250. A win is a win. So just making it out there, though, the Demon Ducks hadn't really flexed their muscle on anybody, per se. So we'll see if they can finally flex their muscle this week, or if it'll be another close game, and see if the Dominators can get back on track after last week's stumble against the Warner Robin Bombers. But that has been a look at your Week 15. All right, folks, let's take a look at who's hot and who's not. So who's hot right now? You've got the Warner Robin Bombers. They've won 2 in a row, and they are on the prowl. And another team that's hot right now is the Gatlinburg Cubs. Jackson and Scotty are both hot on the presses with 2 wins in a row. And the Wildcats have a win. I mean, they're not 2 in a row, but they did get a win last week over Dan. And now for the who's not, the Atlanta Express Reuben, they've lost 3 in a row. And the just a little crazy Dan, he's lost 2 in a row. So that is your look at who's hot and who's not. Let's have a look at that playoff preview for Week 15. Right now, your number 1 seed, you have Greg at 10-4 with the Demon Duck Lindsays, who's right now ahead by a game over the Atlanta Express, sitting at 9-5. They're the 2nd seed. Right now, Greg has a 1-game advantage. The head-to-head is tied at 1-1, and the Express own an extra tiebreaker with points 4 over Greg right now. So Greg needs to win, needs to have a better record than the Express to remain at number 1. And the Express right now are number 2 at 9-5. Then you have the Wildcats sliding back up to number 3 at 8-6. And you have the Georgia Dominators at number 4 at 8-6. The Wildcats and Dominators are at 3-4. The Wildcats have a points 4 tiebreaker over the Dominators. The Wildcats and Dominators series is tied at 1 apiece, but it goes to points 4 right now. That's why the Wildcats are 3 and the Dominators are 4. Then at number 5, you have Dan, who's ahead of Ken based off of points 4. Both of them are a game behind in the playoff standings. The series is both Dan is behind the Wildcats. The series is tied 1-1, but Dan loses the points 4 tiebreaker, and Dan loses the points 4 tiebreaker to the Dominators as well, behind 1-1. Ken loses the head-to-head against the Dominators 0-2. So that is a look at your playoff preview, and it just so happens this week that we do have the Dominators versus the Demon Duck Lindsays, 1-4 versus 1. So that just so happens to happen. So that is a look at your playoff preview right now.
All right, folks, we're here in the Cashman Sports field. We're going to take a look at those weekly power rankings for Week 14. Couple of a little bit different this week. Thomas is going by standings, not by head-to-head and points 4. So in that number 1 spot, you've got the Demon Ducks at 10-5 or 10-4. Following number 2, you've got the Atlanta Express. Number 3, you've got the Wildcats. Number 4, you've got the Georgia Dominators. Number 5, you got just a little bit crazy. Number 6, you've got the Macon Chili Dogs. Number 7, you've got the Warner Robin Bombers. And falling back down to the number 8 spot is the Gatlinburg Cubs at 3-11. Hopefully my Gatlinburg Cubs is starting to click and will make some progress and make some splashes at the trade deadline. But that's your Week 14 power rankings. All right, folks, that's all we have for today's show on Baseball Now. I'm your host, Scotty, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your work week. We hope you tune in for Cashman Sports' other show this week on Thursday, The Bullpen, with Thomas. And looking forward to a couple of our college football shows for our College Football League and NFL shows for our upcoming NFL League that will be coming out here shortly. So for your host, Scott, I hope you hit that subscribe button and like. And we look forward to seeing you again next Monday.